Welcome back, English Lit Scholars. It's Dr. Barry again, and we're discussing the second half of Beowulf, which is kind of a false distinction because it's all one long poem. The distinction between part one and part two is mine. At this point, we see that 50 years have passed. Beowulf has ascended to king after the death of King Hygelac. Now, 50 years have passed, and he has grown old and wise as a king. He has ruled his people with great determination and great strength, and it's been a time period of peace. And then something happens, because of course it does. It wouldn't be a story without a conflict, and our conflict, luckily for us, involves a dragon. Now, here's a great portrait of King Beowulf. Much older now, much wiser, has experienced many years as on the throne and kept his people safe. But a new threat has arisen. Now, some translations say that it might have been that the warrior in question came to a cave. Okay. The dragon might have been content to leave the Geats alone. He'd spent 3 centuries guarding this cave full of treasures, and were it not for some poor wretched soul who had fallen out of favor with the king, and who had, in some translations, come to the cave seeking wealth to pay the weir-guild to the family of a man he had killed. The cup, the goblet in question, winds up in Beowulf's possession a bit later on. He stole a golden bejeweled goblet from the dragon's cave and a series of rings as well. The man didn't mean to anger the dragon. He was just trying to improve his station in life and, get back his position. In some places, in some translations, he's listed as a slave. In most translations, or other translations rather, he is seen as a warrior. What follows is a lengthy philosophical passage on the nature of wealth. The Beowulf poet tells us that the hoard was built by someone long ago, long forgotten. It was the last of his kind, and had placed all of this wealth here in this cave on somewhere off the coast of Geatland. Everyone he knew, everyone he was associated with, he was the last of his kind. And they're all gone now. And he didn't get to enjoy the wealth for very long himself. Well, the words of the hoarder reflect his loneliness, being the last of his race, and the others having died, and how their wealth and their might had not saved them from the approach of the Grim Reaper. The hoarder reflects that having this wealth, and won't have much time to enjoy it, despite his opulence. He wanders the world sad and alone until he too dies. And at some point years later, the dragon came and found his way into the cave and made it his home. Up until our hapless hero finds his way in and steals away with some treasure to, pay off his weir-guild. Well, the dragon isn't going to stand for this, obviously. And so, in his rage and his anger, he goes and begins to terrorize Beowulf's land. Now, the text reveals to us that while he was content to stay there in this cave and just guard over this vast amount of gold and jewels and other treasures, he didn't mind so much doing battle with the Geats, particularly Beowulf. We're told that the dragon searches for the wretch, but cannot find him anywhere. And so at night he comes out and flies and wreaks havoc on the souls of the poor countryside and the farmers and the folks of Geatland, who were just kind of minding their own business up to this point until somebody came in and upset the apple cart, or perhaps the gold cart, as the case may be. Interestingly, dragons and Beowulf seem to only travel at night. Now, this could be hearkening back to the theory that perhaps we got the idea of dragons from a meteor or a comet that passed through the night sky once. Well, who can say for sure? But this dragon only travels by night. The dragon employs a literal scorched earth policy. He destroys first the countryside and the farms, the villages on the way, and then eventually he really goes full bore and he burns up Beowulf's castle. This will not stand. Beowulf foreshadows that what is coming will be Beowulf's last battle. And this battle with the dragon also kind of harkens back to a German hero named Sigmund, a dragon slayer. Beowulf commissions an iron shield to be made, because the wooden ones would burn up. They offer no protection against the dragon's flames. But out of pride, he chooses to face the dragon without an army. Here the Beowulf poet tells us of the hero's ascension to the throne after Hygelac is killed. And the queen offers him the throne, of course, because her son is young, and she doesn't believe in his ability to rule. She offers him the throne because she has a young son, and she's not confident in his ability to rule. But instead, what Beowulf does, he supports the young prince until he's ready. The young king invites the Schiffling king for a peace conference, but Onela, the Shielding king, the young king invites the Shielding king for a peace conference, but Onela, the Shielding, murders him, at which point Beowulf ascends to the throne and takes vengeance for Herdred's murder. After forming an alliance with Edgil, the Friendless, and others, and the nephew of Onela, Beowulf assembles a group of 13 men to go and fight the dragon, the 13th being the men who started all the trouble. The Beowulf poet gives an account of his youth and how he was fostered by a king as a child. The king treated him as one of his own, but the king gave up his kingdom after one of his sons murdered the other one. Beowulf offers one final hero's boast as he goes off to fight. At the entrance of the cave, he orders his men to wait for them. In the Anglo-Saxon, the word is weird, W-Y-R-D. Weird is the word for fate. Will favor in the battle with the dragon. So Beowulf enters the cave and challenges the dragon. Now the dragon, hearing a human voice, rises and comes out to meet the hero, and they lock into combat. The two begin to fight, each frightening the other with their might and their power. Despite the differences, neither one seems able to prevail against the other. Beowulf's sword fails him for the first time as he's unable to penetrate the dragon's scales, and he falls back. The battle is so fierce that it terrifies the men he brought with him, most of whom run off into the woods, save for one, a bold, young, untested warrior named Wiglaf, the G being silent here. Wiglaf says to him, "Hey, this man gives us rings, gives us power, awarded us our armor. He has supported us. We cannot leave him in his hour of need. What kind of men are you?" And so boldly, though he's only bearing a wooden shield, he rushes into the cave to support his king. Wiglaf says, "As God is my witness, I would rather my body were robed in the same burning blaze as my gold giver's body than to go home bearing arms." Wiglaf rushes in, encourages Beowulf, urges him to do all that he said he would do, and he finishes with, "I shall stand beside you." And here, ladies and gentlemen, is true heroism. Wiglaf, the untested, the untried warrior, going to defend his king against a seemingly undefeatable foe. Wiglaf's speech inspires Beowulf, and he redoubles his efforts. And unfortunately, it also inspires the dragon, who ferociously attacks, grabbing Beowulf by the neck, sinking his teeth into his throat. Wiglaf rushes forward and plunges his sword into the dragon's belly, and the flames are decreased. Seizing the advantage, Beowulf pulls his dagger from his side and stabs the dragon in the flank, thus ending the dragon. The two are victorious, but at great cost. The poison of the dragons begins to spread through Beowulf's veins. As Weird dictated, Beowulf was never meant to kill the dragon with his own sword, and the dragon, having seized the advantage, has brought our hero low. Beowulf's wounds begin to swell and fester. He knows his time is limited. He bemoans the fact that he has no son to bestow his armor on, and he asks Wiglaf to go and bring him some of the hoard for him to look upon. The poet tells us that at some later point, a man will come and loot some of the dragon's hoard, which gives us the sense that all of this is ephemeral, that such a treasure falls from one dead man's hand into another. Beowulf looks upon the treasures sadly and gives thanks to God that he could have leave his people so well endowed, so with such great wealth. He gives instructions for his funeral pyre, bestows his armor upon Wiglaf. His final words are, "You are the last of us, only one left of the Wajmundings. Fate has swept us away, sent my whole brave and high-born clan to their final doom, and now I must follow them." At this point, the men who ran away into the woods return, ashamed of their actions, to face Wiglaf's rebuke. He tells them, "Our king gave you weapons and armor, and you might as well have thrown them away when he did that. Even though he wanted to face the dragon alone, we should have been there." He says, "Once word gets out that you ran away when the king needed you, all of our enemies are going to attack us." And he gives an account of a lot of the Swedish wars of the time. "The princes of foreign lands are going to come and take all of Geatland for themselves." He says, "A warrior would rather die than live a life of shame." A rider is sent with word of Beowulf's death and the deeds of Wiglaf and the cowardly actions of Beowulf's thanes. The people gather for a funeral, as per his instructions. A funeral pyre is prepared. The death of a monarch always leaves a country in danger. The writer warns of the threat of invasion by the Franks and the Frisians, old enemies that Beowulf had long kept at bay. He further states how the Swedes will no longer honor their pact with the Geats and seek revenge for old wrongs. The writer recounts past battles and enemies who now present a threat to Geatland. The people go to pay their respects to Beowulf and find the dragon beside him burnt some 50 feet in length, this creature was. The treasures beside him, swords, plates, eaten through with rust. The hoard is under a spell, so only those that God allows can enter the cave. Again, here the Beowulf poet expounds on the nature of wealth and how the builder of the hoard, all of his wishes and all of his work had come to naught. The nature of wealth is that it is temporary. And as much as you may amass it, you only have a limited time to enjoy it, if you enjoy it at all. Wiglaf, in his speech, tells the people of the consequences of pride. He says how often they tried to convince him not to go and fight the dragon, and how his choice has put his people in danger, done great harm to them. He tells them that no matter what they said, Beowulf would not listen and leave the dragon alone. "We have a great treasure, but at a high cost." Wiglaf tells the people of Beowulf's final wishes for his burial, and they perform his funeral rites. A Geatish woman sings a dirge expressing her fears about the future, and the poem concludes with praise for the Geat people for their kingdom. And here is a photograph. It is a representation of what is said to be Beowulf's barrow, a tomb made where Beowulf's funeral pyre was. And amidst it, or within the walls of it, there were many great treasures, perhaps further emphasizing that you can't take it with you. And so ends the story of Beowulf. Perhaps a cautionary tale about pride. It's at least the second part. And I would have to wonder if in his final moments fighting the dragon, perhaps Hygelac's words about vulnerability and how even the great man can be subject to violence and is not invincible echoed in his ears. Some poets look at the monsters in Beowulf as representations. The devil, Grendel and Grendel's mother, of course, representatives of Cain, and the dragon, perhaps the devil himself. In the story of King George, or of St. George and the dragon, of course, St. George, it's an allegory with St. George battling the devil. There's also, however, some mixture here of paganism within it, which might explain the Wiglaf's trying to convince Beowulf not to go up against the dragon, that he's too powerful and he can't fight him. There's also a possible reading. You could possibly read Beowulf as a kind of Christ figure, sacrificing himself for his people. A lot of different reads. And remember, in reading that sort of reading a hero as a Christ figure, it's not a one-to-one comparison. There are elements that are there, but it's not the actual, Jesus Christ. Anyway, fascinating story, the oldest tale in our English literature. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.